Hello, my fellow ATSers, and welcome to another episode of ATS Fully Engaged Battlefield Walkarounds. Today we're going to review the module. Well, that's a good question. There's a little bit of confusion about the title of this module. The game itself says Gallabat, the War in East Africa 1940. The Battlefield Walkaround terms it Gallabat and Beyond, East Africa 1940 to 1941. And on the Critical Hit website, we have the title Caesar in Abyssinia, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with the other two. That would undoubtedly be Mussolini's favorite title. But for that very reason, and due to the fact that you can't see that title anywhere else, we're not going to call it that. Also, the product code is termed ATS _ Gallabat, so that's right. And obviously Gallabat's a pretty specific word. You're not going to have any trouble doing a search on the Critical Hit website and finding it that way if you wish to look for the product. Entonces, the historical situation that we're talking about is indeed the war in East Africa, 1940 and 1941. So when war was declared between Italy and Great Britain, they started fighting across their colonial possessions, including in Africa. Here, Gallabat is a town it's on one of the sides of Ethiopia and Somaliland, but I'm not going to remember now, but that's okay. But we're talking about fighting in Sudan, Kenya, Somaliland, Ethiopia, and Abyssinia. Abyssinia concludes Ethiopia for those keeping score, but that's okay. So we're talking about British, Italians, and then lots and lots of colonial troops all duking it out and fighting back and forth over the important towns and in the bush. So, interesting stuff going on. We'll take a look at the components. We've got, first of all, you have far more components, not far more, but you have more components than what it says on the website, on the Critical Hit entry. They're supposed to be, it says there are 4 geoboards that are actually 8 geoboards at 11 by 16. So I'm just going to put 1 up there because there's 7 more and you don't really need to see them all. Well, I'll do a quick rundown later just for some interesting terrain features. But for now, just to do a quick overview so you know what's going on. That's a nice paper shuffling sound in the background. Oh man, the microphone picks up everything. You're supposed to have 10 scenarios, but according to the website, you actually have 12. There's scenario number 12. Ta-da! There we go, on 6 cards. You have a sheet of terrain overlays, which, we have to talk about this now. There are 3 overlays, as you can probably see by the lack of glare. That's not a glossy sheet. That's just, I hesitate to call it cardstock. It's just paper. It's a, slightly heavier paper, but not, it's not like a map sheet paper. And you have to cut them out. I knew that was a thing that some Critical Hit products had. I didn't know that this was one of them, or that the overlays. I knew that ASL products had them. I did not, or ASL Comp. I did not know ATS did. So, the cutting out, I'm not so concerned about because you just have to cut, with a paper cutter or whatever, and use a tool to keep it straight. So that's not the end of the world. But yeah, paper, that should be glossy. But there you go. That's what that is. Fortunately, there are, of the 12 scenarios, only 4 of them. Only 4, which, 1/3, but it's not like every single scenario you have to deal with the overlay. So you could, if you have the module, you could play 8 scenarios and just never have to deal with the overlays. You've got 2 AFV cards. These are some fully loaded AFV cards. They both have Urful. And other than the Matilda, you're not going to see a lot of big numbers for armor values. Everything's a 2, a 1. You see some 3s and 4s, but yeah, these are pre-war and early war tanks, so if you can call them that. Tankettes. We'll go with tankettes and armored cars. So those are those. Let's take a look at the counters. I had to stage this counter sheet right here to start with because some of them are already falling out. So we'll bring the camera down to the counter sheet rather than the other way around. We've got tons of trucks, Tons of guns, lots of howitzers, which I'm interested to see. I haven't played with howitzers too much. With that 10 minimum range, you have to be playing on a pretty big map for them to do anything. So I'm curious to see how that will work out. You have some tank tipping counters, which is not a joke. We will get to that later. Lots of trucks, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of scenarios where you bring your guys around in trucks, a la cavalry, but with no horses. You have some different planes. I'm pretty sure these are not in any other module. I could be wrong, though. I actually have no idea. I'm just talking out of my butt. But the Battlefield Walkaround made it sound like those were not found elsewhere. These are found elsewhere. These are just regular Italians. So nothing too regular desert Italians, I should add. I was playing an East Front module recently on VATS, and I didn't have the East Front Italians downloaded, so I was worried that they were going to be very cold in their shorts. And here we have Brits, which also represent other Commonwealth troops like South Africans. There's a couple funky counters, but all right, we'll ruin the surprise. So these are carrier pigeons. I am not making this up. And those are on the left-hand side, the two far left, top far left. There we go. I got there. I'll just point. Those are carrier pigeon baskets. Rate of fire 2. So those shoot off. Maybe that's not the right term, but you can use your NCOs and officers to release the carrier pigeons that can then go do stuff. As far as I could see, I looked pretty closely at the scenarios because I was very curious. One, because they're interesting. Also because I didn't know anything about this aspect of the war. I mean, even less so than I know generally about World War II. But so I read them pretty closely, and the scenarios are fairly big and meaty. So I wanted to get a grasp before doing this Battlefield Walkaround. And I only found one scenario that had the carrier pigeons, which is a shame, but probably for the best. I mean, that's the kind of chromey thing that's fun to play with occasionally, but probably not something you want every single game. Excuse me. And what the carrier pigeons do in that scenario is they fly across the map to the opposite side, and they're basically trying to exit. And as soon as they exit, then the British, can send their tanks on. And if the carrier pigeons don't make it, because they can be shot, and there's rules for that. There's actually a fairly significant section of rules, maybe too significant for pigeons, but there it is. So if they get shot, and they can fly up and down and do other stuff, then they don't make it. Then the Brits have to wait till turn 7 of 10 instead of as soon as they get off map. So it does make it kind of an interesting little twist in that the Italians and their colonial allies have to decide, do we want to be spending our time and energy and gunfire factors on pigeons or keep those tanks off, or do we have more important things to do? So I think it's a cool little addition. Again, not something I would want every single game, but it's fun. One thing is, as far as I can tell, there's only two baskets and 2 pigeons. So the scenario calls for 3, which, I mean, I don't really need 3 pigeons and 3 baskets, but man, it would be nice. It'd be nice to have the amount you need in the scenario, unless I'm missing a counter that I'm not seeing somewhere, but I don't think so. Other than that, though, the module seems to be self-contained, other than, of course, needing the rules and markers and all that good stuff, normal stuff. And yeah, I didn't do every single counter like I normally would do because these are pretty meaty scenarios. There's a lot of units, a lot of counters, a lot of emplacements, all that kind of thing. Speaking of which, you'll probably need some emplacements. I might add a note at the end because there's one where I think you need 16 of something, barbed wire or whatever. So if you're new to medium level in terms of how long you've been playing and collecting ATS player, you might not have as many as you need. I'll add a note to that later on. But other than that, for combat units, it seems like it comes with everything you need. I mean, I checked the trucks because there's scenarios with tons and tons of trucks. So tankettes. So that all looks good. So that's pretty cool. Oh, and then the last counter sheet is Eritreans, Ethiopians, and Sudanese. You also have some nice World War I machine guns, the Lewis and the Madsen, which are like glorified automatic rifles. You have, instead of satchel charges, you have TNT charges, which are slightly less potent. And then, of course, yeah, all your Askaris and colonial troops are not super powerful, as you expect. Although in some scenarios, they do get courage. All of them, which is a little iffy. I don't love using courage as a balancing mechanism, but for these units, maybe it's okay. Speaking of special rules, I think we can jump right to that. I mean, there's a Battlefield Walkaround. We don't really need to see that. It exists. Don't worry. Some of the other special rules, I showed the tipping counter before. I'm not going to put it back because I have to move the camera again. But the tank tip, it's like cow tipping. It's really what it sounds like. You can take 2-3 SP or equivalent squads and do melee and dip a tank, which is actually pretty good because it's a little silly, of course. It's just kind of an excuse to give them a better way to melee tanks. But I don't mind. Again, it's not something you want to see every game, but having it in a module is fun. Other cool stuff, there's a lot of interesting stuff. You have cactus patches and cactus hedges, which are pretty interesting. They're obviously very difficult to get through, and you can only infiltrate, and you get double winded for personnel if you go through. So that means you have to spend 2 turns to get it off, and the penalties are double, which is pretty harsh. ATRs, anti-tank rifles, they're actually useful in this game. I like ATRs. I don't understand how you can not like ATRs. It's basically an enormous sniper rifle meant to kill a tank. That's pretty cool, but unfortunately, most of the time they're not very useful. But in this module, they are quite useful. Quite useful. As mentioned, lots of trucks. Oh, there's some captured weapon penalties, because presumably the colonial troops aren't so up and up on the technological aspect of how to use other weapons. I actually would like that in other games, I think. Not other games, other ATS modules. I think the default of not having penalties is good just for simplicity. But I think I think a lot of times, it's a rifle, and you use a rifle enough, and you know how to use another bolt-action rifle. But it's probably reasonable for other modules as well. So I kind of like to see that. And we already talked about the World War machine guns. We talked about the carrier pigeons. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Yeah, those are the main things. There's a rule about fire groups and limiting fire groups, just like with the NVA and the VC. And there's one, just similarly in parallel, there's one group that cannot form fire groups at all, just like the VC in a way, and then one group that can. But then the rule is unclear because it says at least 1 hex, which is to form a multi-hex fire group, which that's just the normal rule. So I'm gonna have to email Ray and get some clarification about that. So what else is there to talk about? We have to look at the maps a little bit more than that because they're very cool. Obviously, geoboards, all of us at ATSFE are big fans of historical maps, but in this case, the maps are cool enough and specific, and not specific enough, they're not historical, but this is a kind of product module you'd never have. You'd never have a specific game about this. No, you might, but it'd be tough to want to play because you have to learn an entire game just to play about this topic. You could have a historical map about Gallabat or 1 or 2 areas, but just having that breadth of battles is just not going to happen without geoboards. So, and it's bush terrain. It's not the kind of thing where it's going to be easy to figure out what it is, what it looked like. So, also might give them a lot of leeway because they have forts printed on the maps, which is really cool. No overlay. It's not like Tobruk where you have to have a fort overlay. And then I think they already showed the other one. Yeah, that's good stuff. That's really cool. Defending the Alamo. And there's multiple fort attacking scenarios. Yeah, lots of rough terrain. There's a good amount of open terrain as well. Elevation changes. Most of the roads are actually tracks. And speaking of nasty bush terrain tracks, there's one scenario where the trucks have to make a roll on an immobilization roll, an MKIll table, if they go on any hex that's not a track, which actually, when you read about fighting in these types of areas, sounds about right. It's pretty harsh, but pretty realistic. So I thought that was a cool SSR. So speaking of scenarios, let's just talk briefly about the scenarios. They're long. They're all 9 to 10 turns, except for one 8-turn scenario. I don't think that's a great way to design scenarios. I think having some shorter ones is good, both for just practical purposes of playing, but also bigger's not better. But that said, there are big and meaty and interesting. There's not really any small ones as you'd expect because they're so long. They're only medium plus. I don't know if there's any monster scenarios, but there's lots with one side has 20 squads and plenty of weapons and other accoutrements or whatever. There's a couple scenarios with multiple victory conditions, and you have to choose 2 or 3 out of 4 or 5 or whatever it is, and that's kind of interesting. It's a bit much to keep track of. Maybe you have to be focused on multiple things at once. But it is interesting because it gives it more replay value, gives it more fog of war. It makes it pretty interesting. Less soloable, I suppose, if that's an issue for you. I mean, I don't know if this is one you're going to do tons of soloing because it's big and long, but I will definitely solo it at some point and maybe do a video or article on it. There's three, I think, scenarios where you're attacking forts. There's a couple scenarios where you're doing normal things like attacking buildings. There's scenarios where one side's trying to exit while the other side's trying to do other stuff. There's a lot going on. There's a good amount. There's one that's like a convoy. That's the one with the truck immobilization off-track SSR. And that one's mostly just fighting, but it's interesting because you have to come on as a convoy and stay on as a convoy for a while, and then you duke it out. And there's actually a good amount of scenarios with aircraft. I mean, not good aircraft, but they're there. There's at least 3 or 4 scenarios, and there's a couple scenarios in which both sides have aircraft, and a lot of it's randomized. They roll less than the turn number kind of thing, and to get your aircraft, which can make it again better replay value. It keeps it interesting. Nice motorcycle in the background, and gets in the spirit of trucks and vehicles. So that's Gallabat, whatever the subtitle is. I'm actually pretty excited about this one. As you may have gleaned from this very long BW. It's not, I'd like to have a historical map, but I'd rather have a module about this subject than, the perfect historical map and another module in the bulge or something. Something very different. It's got a lot of flavor. It's just got a lot going on. So maybe at some point I'll do a review, although I probably will not do my usual and play every single scenario because that's, almost 120 turns of scenarios of playing ATS scenarios just for this one module. But if you have any questions or interested in the module and want to ask a question, please hit us up in the comments or in our other channels or podcast and the blog and all that good stuff.